Good morning and welcome to WishwaTalks. My name is Trishant and I thank you all for attending today's event. For those of you who have attended a WishwaTalk before, a warm welcome back. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, here's a little bit about us. WishwaTalks is a space to expand the horizons of your mind. Every webinar, we call experts from different domains to discuss and examine opinions, issues, problems, and perspectives. Each webinar is an interactive session where we all walk away with more respect for each other and a deeper understanding of the topic at hand. If you missed a session, please visit our website or YouTube channel for a full library of past Vishwa Talks on various interesting topics. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, it is with great pleasure that I introduce our keynote speaker for today's Vishwa Talk. Karan Kumar is a remarkable individual who has dedicated close to a decade of his life to advancing climate action with a unique focus on queer liberation. His work is unlocking investments to scale innovations and promote the circular economy in fashion, agri-food systems, and allied sectors across the globe, and is truly inspiring. In his current role as a program manager with Lotus, Karan's focus on making the fashion industry sustainable and steering a radical transition away from fossil fuels across the supply chain is both commendable and critical in our fight against climate change. His efforts have already led to early successes in scaling low carbon circular technologies in various parts of the world. Karan's academic background in liberal arts combined with his expertise in environmental studies and literary and cultural studies makes him a thought leader in the field. He is a member of the Economic Forum's Global Shapers community and Unleash Innovation Lab Talent, one of the two Indian youth selected to represent the voice of young people at World Economic Forum 23 and has spoken at various conferences around the world on topics related to circularity, climate change, climate action, and more. We are honored to have him here to share his insights with us today. Please join me in welcoming Karan for today's Vishwa Talk. Before we get started, I would like to inform our audience that our speaker will be taking questions from you after the main talk. So please leave your questions in the chat or use the raise hand tool and we will allow you to ask your questions in person. I request everyone to turn on your webcams for the interactive part of the webinar. The speaker will be answering questions till 12:15 p.m., so kindly keep the questions short and concise. Now, without further ado, I invite our speaker to begin today's Vishwa Talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, good morning.
Super. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining on a Saturday at 11. It's really a pleasure to be here. And thank you for the very kind words of introduction to Shant and Team Vishwa. I'll just start by saying, not much more about myself, but that, yeah, indeed, my goal in life has really been to accelerate climate change, action to tackle climate change, really. Because it's an issue that I think we all know about, but we don't do enough about because we don't know what to do with it. And that's why I'm really excited to be sharing this stage with you. And with that, I'd love to maybe start off by telling you that I'm going to do a presentation for about 15, 20 minutes, maybe a little more. If I talk too much, please feel free to let me know. And then I will move into sort of question and answers because I really love to sort of keep things a bit more conversational, love to answer your questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat as well if you need to. So yeah, if I could have my slides up, if that's possible, that would be great. Great. So to start off, I wanted to just set some context, right? I think that in the world today, everybody's talking about climate change and sustainability, and everybody knows that the world is increasing in temperature, but we're not necessarily seeing that. Some places are getting colder, some places are getting warmer. I mean, our seasons are changing. We're getting a lot more rain than we used to, sometimes no rain at all. And this is something that affects us across the world, and it affects us at our local levels as well. So I wanted to take this opportunity to really share with you what really does it mean when we say climate change, and how can we sort of look at this big bad wolf in the world, and understand what it means to us at a personal level and at a local, more contextual level. If we can go to the next slide, please. Um, Super. So the first thing I want to start with is that there are many myths around climate change. So we've all heard that, climate change is natural, that carbon emissions are, increasing, and there's a lot more that's happening. It's too late to do things. So these are the three big sort of themes that I hear from a lot of people every time I talk to them. And I wanted to sort of go over each one of them and share a few facts or thoughts, right? And a few pieces of evidence with you to say that, well, the climate does indeed change naturally, but we are responsible for a lot of the more rapid climate change that's been happening over the last 40 or so years. And so I'll start with this big piece around carbon, right? There's this theory right now that goes around called carbon tunnel vision, where essentially everybody's focused just on carbon, but then you forget about all the other impacts, right? About biodiversity loss, about shrinking ice sheets, about droughts, about extreme heat events, about many other climate events that we hear about, we see, we experience, but we don't necessarily understand how they're related to us. Emissions indeed is a big, big, big factor. And so that's why I think looking at it from just a carbon perspective is important. It's a good indicator, but it's not the only one, right? Methane emissions, for instance, someone just put in the chat, is a big, big, big part of it as well. And right now, just to give you a sense of where we're at, temperatures today have been, I think, recorded at 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than about what it was 40 years ago. And this kind of fluctuation has not happened over the last maybe 800,000 years or so in the Earth's history. And to put that in context, the planet and, well, the Earth is about 4.56 billion years old. If you think about our time on this planet, it's a small piece of that time. And in that small amount of time, we've been able to change a lot of this planet's face. We've been able to sort of create a lot of deforestation. We've been able to increase sea level across the world. We've been able to remove ice caps from both the poles. It's a bit tremendous, and it's also I see it as a double-edged sword in terms of seeing the human potential that we've been able to do this, and at the same time, what else could we do to fix everything that we've done, right? So to say that, I then move on to the fact that climate change is indeed natural. So if you look at the Earth's history, temperatures have indeed been changing. We've been through periods of ice ages. We've been through periods of like warm, extreme heat, tumultuous sort of geological events across sort of those 4.56 billion years. But just in the time that we've had the Industrial Revolution, about 200 years or so, and especially in the last 50 years, the climate has changed radically. It's changed in ways that we didn't anticipate. And just in 2023, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the foremost authority around the world on climate change and hosts, the COP events around the world every year, soon to happen in Dubai, actually, in a couple of weeks, said that we are on a really dangerous track. Just in the last, I think, 40 years, we've increased sort of our temperature to 1.1 degrees, closer and closer to the 1.5 degrees accord that was set in 2015 at the Paris Agreement between governments to limit climate change and increase temperatures to 1.5 degrees. We are seeing more than 279 billion tons of ice being lost almost, over the course of 10, 20 years in places like Greenland and in the Northern Pole. It's really something to think about. But I think, with all of this doom and gloom and all the narrative around doom and gloom, that we will not be able to survive, that the Earth's face is changing, that we will all sort of live in cities on the coast that will essentially be, become islands at some point due to sea level rises. There's still hope. So I want to leave you on this slide with the fact that while it's all doom and gloom, and there are a lot of different sort of pieces of misinformation and evidence going around, it's not too late. And we still have the power and the ability to change things. And that's where it becomes important, if we can go to the next slide, to talk about what it means really to enable climate action, right? And to enable an understanding of what it means to be in a space where climate change is happening. So I'll sort of start off by telling you that climate change does have global effects, right? All of this sort of talk around increased carbon emissions, increasing temperature. I mean, 1.5 degrees is not that much. Every day the temperature changes, here and there. But when you say 1.5 degrees or 1.1 degrees, as the current stock take says, it actually means that on average around the world, our temperatures have increased by 1.1. So if today the temperature was 10 degrees on average, because of climate change, it's become 11.1 degrees. And that has major, major consequences on biodiversity. You'll see loss of wildlife, you'll see changes in weather patterns, and you might notice this yourself, right? And this is where I think we experience climate change in different ways when we think about our own local environment and context. So just in India, if you think about it, even in every state, it's different. Weather patterns change so much that crop cycles have changed. There's lesser rain in some parts of India, and there's more rain in some parts of India, meaning communities that relied on rain-fed agriculture for a very long time now have to switch to irrigated agriculture, which means they need the infrastructure to do that, which means development, which means a lot of things that also cause a lot more climate change. Various other places have seen sort of reduced wildlife, and because of the fact that we're constantly cutting down forests, changing uses of land, and expanding our cities, we end up having to create heat islands. It's getting hotter in the city, but the more you go outside, it's getting cooler and cooler. And why is that? Because of the fact that, well, concrete is just not a good material in the way that it conducts and reflects heat. And it traps heat in urban islands. So we all experience this in very different ways. There are also sort of at the global level, these sustainable development goals that are 17 goals where for each goal, there are different sort of areas of work that the world needs to focus on. So things around ensuring, from environmental issues of like reducing waste to reducing our emissions to protecting sort of forests, ensuring and conserving water, fresh water especially, all the way to creating worker well-being, increasing our livelihoods in sort of vulnerable communities, ensuring zero poverty and zero hunger. So these are a sort of wide range of goals. But what most people don't understand or well, you probably understand it, I should not undermine that. But what most people don't know is that each of these sustainable development goals actually has individual targets within them. And that's where it gets very interesting. So I'm not sure how many of you know about the goals that were before the Sustainable Development Goals. They were called the Millennium Development Goals. And essentially, they were a set of goals that were also focused on sustainable development. But at some point in the last few years, we saw that there was a shift. Suddenly, the Millennium Development Goals started sort of, being played down and they were shut off. And then the Sustainable Development Goals were launched. Not to say that there was not any change that happened when the Millennium Development Goals were in place. Estimates and evidence and reports and studies, etc., suggest that between 2010 and 2015, we did indeed see some significant changes because of the Millennium Development Goals. Well, that's the attribution at least. But we've also seen in the last 5 to 10 years so much more happen. I mean, COVID is a big issue that we all, I think, still face. We might say the pandemic is over, but we indeed have to recognize that it has left an indelible mark on us. We are seeing a lot more people go back into poverty. We're seeing economies go into sort of recession. We're seeing inflation on the rise. We're seeing a lot more sort of production of intense materials and products that use sort of fossil fuels. We are all, I guess, buying cars, buying houses, and a lot of that does have climate impact. And the way that I want to sort of that I want you to think about this is that while all of this is happening, and sure, we're all moving towards a better goal for ourselves, the way that we think about it in the context of climate change is that we all have a role to play. Our small actions do have consequences, and that's not to say that we shouldn't do those actions, right? you should be sort of, buying a new car if you want to, but why not think about buying an electric car, right? You should be thinking about what it means to have an increased amount of disposable income, but why not also think about what that means if you were to donate it to a cause, or if you were to support sort of conservation efforts and deforestation and reduce deforestation around the world. Just in India, for instance, in Madhya Pradesh, there are tribal belts across Madhya Pradesh where lots of smallholder farmers exist, and smallholder farmers are folks that have less than sort of 2 hectares of land to themselves. And what we've seen is, because of climate change, they've all been affected because they don't have the kind of resources that they need to support productivity in their land. But there are efforts now by various organizations around the world, and I'm sure that as members of this community, you can also then create opportunities and create projects that could support this kind of conservation. So, like I said, everyone does have a role to play, and every action does have a consequence. But I want to sort of take a moment to contextualize that, right? Because there's sort of 2 ways to think about it. The first is that at a larger global level, climate change is happening. But at a local level, we have what we think are impacts of climate change that we can live with, right? It's hotter, wear looser clothes, turn on your AC, etc. But then you have the consequence of that, which is if you turn on your AC, you're also then contributing to climate change. You're sort of using energy, you're releasing sort of noxious gases and fumes into the environment. And I know it's hard to live without an AC. I can't be sort of saying that, we shouldn't have them. I also use one, but I use it sparingly, right? I try and see if I can have more plants around me. I try and see if I can, work with our local sort of community to stop everybody from turning on the AC all at once, because then when you go out, it gets hotter because ACs also emit heat. And then because, like I said, in concrete jungles, you end up having to retain heat. It gets hotter and hotter and hotter. So it's sort of a cycle. And that's something we have to recognize in terms of the consequence. But at the same time, talk around rising sea levels, that climate change is the biggest threat facing humanity, etc. These are all, I call them distant threats. And I call them something that I think is actually not beneficial to us, because the way that we have to think about it is more around how do we play a role in contextualizing climate change and climate action to our own lives. And so if we can take that to go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so what does it really mean to think about climate change when we contextualize it to our own lives, right? The first and biggest thing is that we need to find better and new language to think and talk about climate change. Because number one, the fact of climate change does not actually have a link to our urban everyday lives is important. And on top of that, if you think about how climate change affects vulnerable communities around the world, farmers, waste workers, a bunch of other sort of, people that we see around us that do the hard work that they do, we don't see how climate change affects them, and we don't have the language to talk about it. And the moment we switch that language to say that, instead of saying greenhouse gas emissions are increasing, which is true, but instead of saying that, can we say that greenhouse gas emission increases are causing respiratory disorders for agricultural workers and for, as we call it, gig workers that do a lot of the running around the world, and for taxi drivers and for many others that sort of have to live in these urban environments. Just in the last couple of days, if you've read the news in Delhi, air pollution has increased so much so that, even when I get out, and I'm currently in Delhi, I can't breathe. I have to put on a mask, and I see so many people around that are going about their everyday lives that don't have a choice, right, but to be outside. So if we can start to think about climate change as not a looming threat, as not, oh, this will lead to something later in the future, but it is indeed our reality, we'll be able to change the language we use to talk about it. We'll be able to understand how we can actually think of ways to act and ways to sort of keep moving on climate change. And I think what's needed here is not just us changing our own language, but also a sort of tide change in political thought in terms of narrative, because we need to make ways of dealing with climate change and actually the fallout of climate change more contextual and more tangible to ourselves, right? So, for instance, if you think about it, all of these talks around what really, does it mean to be a climate activist, or it does planting a tree really work? They might work, but then is that enough from your own space? Is that something that makes sense for your own local context? Maybe it doesn't, and that's where we need to start sort of peeling the layers off. And to sort of peel those layers off, one of the biggest things beyond language that we need to change is realizing that there's no one solution, right, to fighting climate change. Um, there are many, 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 many solutions. And these can range from big, big, big changes where it could be, for instance, switching to a green search engine. I'm not sure how many of you know, but even the internet causes climate change because of server farms, and because of the fact that a lot of those create heat, they need cooling. A lot of these are underwater, they cause changes in marine life. And all of these things, we are in some way playing a part, right? But that doesn't mean that you stop using the internet. But what you could do is use a green search engine that relies on servers that use renewable energy or solar energy. Um, and you could also, for instance, then realize that you can also play a part in policy making. Every citizen in every country has a voice, right? And you have to be able to use that voice in your local communities to ask for the things that you think you deserve when it comes to climate change and tackling that climate change. I tried to do this in the pandemic in Bombay when I lived there. And it was a very interesting opportunity to bring young people together to realize that they can actually demand an audience with policymakers that were developing climate action plans for the city of Bombay. And we had dialogues with them. We looked at the different climate action plans. We sort of looked at ways in which young people can actually be part of this process to say they have the lived reality, and they need to be the ones in the room when policy decisions are made that will affect them. So realizing that there's many solutions and none of them are perfect, but all of them are necessary is another big, big, big change that we need to make. And that's also how we contextualize climate change to our lives. And I think just to sort of also summarize this piece around contextualizing climate change is that everything needs to be solution oriented, right? Because all of this talk about the threat, about the dangers, about what it means when there's cyclones and droughts. We do have to realize that these are all being caused by climate change. We have to understand that there's science behind it. We have to understand that there's each of us in our own way is affected by climate change. But there are things that we can do about it. And if you think about the sort of big categories of people that exist around the world, so there's young people, there's citizens, there's older people, there's basically us. Then there's citizenry, there's businesses, there's investors, there's governments, policymakers. All of these people have a role to play, and all of these actors have essentially the ability to say that there are solutions out there. And there are. I support a lot of them through my work. I support a lot of them through my engagements with various groups around the world. And the idea is, how do we actually look at these solutions as ways in which we can then start implementing them? So if we can then go to the next slide. Hello? Sorry, could we go to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so what are these solutions really? And how do we contextualize them to our own lives, right? There are many, many, many solutions out there, and they range from big to small. When it comes to tackling climate change, there are things like carbon capture solutions, which are essentially solutions that take carbon in the atmosphere and then process it into raw materials for other industries. It's an innovative, new, interesting concept that a lot of businesses are pushing. But what does that have to do? Not each of us runs a factory. Not all of us can implement carbon capture solutions in our lives. Some might not be able to. There are other solutions, like, for instance, developing what we call Miyawaki forests. right? And I believe I saw something on the Vishwa website about Miyawaki forests as well. They're small, local ways in which we can create biodiverse ecosystems over the course of a short period of time to actually store carbon, to be able to give us productive sort of fruits and vegetables. And it can all be done in less than 100 square feet, right? I've seen solutions like this sprout up all across India, and it's really, really, really exciting, from rooftops to local villages and communities to school gardens. These are really the powerful solutions of our time, right? And they don't take too much to implement. And I guess the question here is, how do we find the right solution for ourselves? So if you live in an urban environment, if you live in the city of, let's say, Delhi, Bombay, or Hyderabad, what is it that you need when it comes to tackling climate change? You need, for instance, to be able to deal with the pollution in these cities. You need to be able to deal with the heat in these cities. You need to be able to deal with the fact that there's not enough green cover in these cities. You need to be able to deal with finding better bio-based construction materials. You need to be able to find, products and services that are more sustainable. So things that don't come in plastic packaging, things that, are circular or recyclable. You also then need solutions from the policy side, which are about better municipal waste management. And I did this very interesting exercise, and I won't name where or anything like that, just to not implicate anyone. But in a space where I used to live, I segregated waste, both wet and dry waste. And I taught a lot of people around me to also do that. I got the community to start doing it. And then we would all segregate. We had a composting unit. We would put the wet and dry waste where it needed to be in separate bins. And then when the local municipality came to collect it, they took all of those waste bins and dumped it all in the same truck. I saw that happen one day. And then the next day, followed this waste truck with another friend of mine that was trying to do this. And we saw that they would take all of this waste and dump it in a landfill, right? And this is all waste that we put in effort to segregate. So sometimes I also understand that our individual actions don't really mean much, but that's where policy and your voice in actually changing policy makes a difference. And so I want to then move from saying that solutions are available. We just need to know what we can do and how we can sort of deal with these solutions and how we can implement them, to realizing that each of us at our various levels in the way that we interact every day socially, in our individual lives, in our professional lives, in our communities, as sort of, active citizens in a democracy, each of us has a role to play. Individually, you can do things using that example, like segregating your waste. You can make a conscious decision to take a cloth bag instead of a plastic bag to go shopping. You can choose products that don't have a long and large environmental footprint in terms of its life cycle. And these are all sort of bits of information that are actually available to you. If you were to ask, when you're going to your local supermarket, to say, what are the products that, exist and what kind of impacts do they have on the environment? This information needs to be available to you, and you can demand that information from producers of these products. So you go and buy a packet of chips, you can ask Lay's what the environmental impact of that packet of chips is. And if you feel like it's not enough, you can go to your local hot chips and maybe get, more crispy, more fresh chips. It's very, very, very interesting to sort of think about how each of us have an individual role to play. Beyond that, in your professional lives, some of you might think that you don't actually have a job that has anything to do with the climate. Like you could be, for instance, doing coding, or you could be doing things like accounting, or, more traditional jobs such as being a doctor or an engineer. But you can think about how you can play a role to tackle climate change, even in those jobs. As a coder, you can think about, like I said, using a green server. You can sort of work towards creating better systems in our IT infrastructure that don't rely on intensive energy use. As sort of an accountant or an engineer, you could think about, how there's something called a triple bottom line. it's not just profit when it comes to money, but how does everything that a company does, or how does everything that an organization does impact people, planet, at all levels, right? And profit. So how can you make money while also saving the environment? It's an interesting question, and I think all of us are struggling with it. But it is possible. Not to say that it isn't. It just requires intent and action from us. When you think about your community, when you think about, for instance, ways in which we all talk to each other, we all gather, we all socialize, what kind of decisions could you make then to actually tackle climate change? Um, so there's a wide variety of actions, and then each of those actions are determined by the level at which you operate in society, and these levels change. Each of us has many levels, right? It's not like I operate at only one level. There's many levels at which I operate, and then the action I take during that interaction, or the action I take when I am at a specific level in society, and in my interactions with society, that is where the decision is really important. And that is where you need to realize that you can ask questions, you can ask around. There's enough information and resources available. And I openly welcome everybody to reach out to me, to seek what these solutions are. Because not everyone knows where they are. And some of us in the climate community have been trying to make it more accessible by creating dashboards, by creating sort of, lists that you can access, by putting up posts on social media. But it's not easy to access this, I would say, because we're not, influencers with 1-2 million followers. But if you just reach out and ask, where can I find a solution that would help me? Where, who can I work with to actually solve a specific problem in my local community? Could I, with the current job that I have, work on climate change in that job? These are all things that you can do, but I think we're too afraid to ask questions to each other because we're too afraid to show that we don't know enough. But that's the beauty of working in climate change. No one knows what's going on. I also, everything I learn about climate, I learn new every day because it's changing so rapidly. I talk to people, I try and learn, and there's enough evidence out there that's coming out every day from different organizations around the world, like the World Resources Institute, like the IPCC, like the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity, many other organizations that are putting out information. And all you have to do is look for that information. So yes, while it's important to ask the question, it's also important to know that you can ask a question, and it's not a bad thing to ask questions and to ask for help, because that's when you can truly collaborate, right? So if we can go to the next slide, please. So what does it mean then to ask these questions? And what does it mean to then seek these solutions and implement them? Like I said, number one is the fact that we all operate at different levels. So you need to understand your impacts. And I can share links after this, but you can go on to sort of websites online to track your carbon footprint or to track your environmental footprint. Because carbon, like I said, is not the only thing, right, that indicates climate change. And then you can tailor your action around it. There are models that you can use to simulate your daily lives, and then these models will pop out things that you could do. You can, for instance, access them if you just Google sort of, individual climate action plans. These are things that are available to you. And I think one of the main things to recognize here is that it's not, everybody thinks about climate change and then they say, oh, but sustainability is expensive. It's not for people that, have the luxury, that don't have the luxury of accessing these solutions. Actually, climate action can mean zero cost as well. It can just mean turning off a switch. It can just mean, for instance, not carrying around a plastic bottle. It can mean walking instead of taking a rickshaw, or and well, if I had to reiterate that, walking is pretty much free for everybody, right? So it's a lot of these things. And I understand that sometimes it's difficult to sort of make these decisions because there's not good sidewalks, then there's not sort of, enough infrastructure to ensure pedestrian safety, or there aren't available alternatives to, green and so fossil fuel-based energy. So what do you do then? That's when you realize your role as part of a larger community, and you ask that your community works with you to make those changes and demand those changes because you have that voice, right? But unless you start to actually try and do this, you will not be able to actually make that change. And I say that quite plainly because I think we're all in search of the perfect solution, right? In terms of how do we be perfectly aligned to climate action. Uh, and often I say this to people that perfect is really the enemy of the good here, because there's no time to be perfect with climate action. We need millions and millions of us doing climate action imperfectly if we really need to be able to tackle climate change. If we're all waiting for the perfect solution, if we're all waiting to be perfect when it comes to ensuring that we use better materials, we use better products, we sort of look at our banks and our finances and we ask them, where are you holding my money? Why aren't you putting these in green bonds? And then they tell you there's no green bonds to put it in. There are actually, they just need to know where they are, and your banks need to find out where they are, so that your money can also be in a bank making the world greener. So there's so many things that we can do, and these are not perfect solutions, but they're things that we all need to start recognizing we can make happen. And in that way, recognize that each of us really does have a role to play in tackling climate action and finding the right solutions and sharing with each other what those solutions are, talking about what worked, what didn't work. So for instance, I now talk about my efforts around waste segregation and a circular economy in the societies that I live in, to tell people that we can do it, but it doesn't really mean much because it goes and gets dumped into a landfill. So I've then been working with the community to now come up with a plan to demand that it doesn't go to landfill, but it goes to a recycling unit or it goes to a material recovery facility. Then we realized there's no material recovery facility. So then we've been working with an organization, a local waste management organization, to actually bring a material recovery facility to the area. So it's sort of steps that you take, and each step you turn and you find something new to do. And it's not going to be easy, but it's something that we all need to do, and we all need to realize that we're here for each other as we do it. So I want to pause here because I've gone over a bunch of things, and I think if we can move to the next slide, say that I'd love to make this an interactive discussion rather than anything else, because I saw a lot of questions come in. And, with climate change, I think it's really a conversation and not a lecture that everyone needs. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Karan. It was indeed very insightful to listen to you. Before we move to the Q&A, I would now like to request the audience to take a 30 seconds to answer a poll for us. The purpose of the poll is to help us understand you a little better so that we can curate the topics that we bring to you. You can also let us know in the chat box how you found out about WishwaTalk. If you are a WishwaTalk subscriber, heard about it through friends or family, or found out about the event on social media. While you take the survey, I would like to express my gratitude to everybody who has joined us today for their presence. And I'm hoping that the contribution will be super interactive and that will make this webinar very successful. I extend my gratitude to our speaker, Karan, for taking time to face the event, all the participants and the Wishwa team. Moving on to the first question from Mr. Sumit Ghosh.
Hi, Karan.
Hi, Sumit.
Yeah, very apt, crisp, and to the point presentation. So my compliment to you. I'm not a specialist into the domain, but I do have a not-for-profit organization, and where this topic is very close to my heart. And we had made one concept note, and that's been presented in C20 forum, and that has been finally got selected and presented. That is a part of the white paper, which has been presented to G20. So let's wait what the policymaker do. Now, you have mentioned 3-4 points, which I totally agree with this. Number one, because I'm also part of the Green Climate Action Take, where we are internationally doing the Green Search Engine project on Green Search Engine, and how green is the web is and how the behavior, because that's I think the arena where most of the people are not aware of. Rather, there is a misconception that digital arena is, a clean area of climate. Now, the things is, I'm coming to that particular point. Everything said and done, the collaboration, where, because I being a part of the not-for-profit organization, that concept note, there are seminars, there are your awareness campaign, all these things are done, but once it comes to the collaboration, there is some challenges where, because without the collaboration, we cannot really take this particular movement to an optimum level. Because your presentation also mentioned that, and I do agree fully on that. One single solution, one single entity cannot, neither it is not possible for only the government or for any other entity. Because if we just go to the deep, and if the root cause analysis we do, this is more of an habit formation. And why the habit formation is not happening? Because lack of awareness. So how can we collaborate more? I think that is the like-minded entities, like-minded people should come together, because everybody can understand. Even we can face the hit of the climate changes. I mean, knowingly, unknowingly, we all can. And so what kind of a behavioral change? You have mentioned a little bit. What kind of a behavioral change can we just influence the younger generation? And because they are the change maker. So the collaboration, I believe, where we are lacking, and how can we do more? Because I'm open for, on behalf of my organization, to collaborate more and more organizations who are working into the different field. So what do you think that how can we really, really increase our engagement level through collaboration?
Yeah, no, and a really good question. Thank you, Sumit. I think I see two parts of your question, right? One is there are challenges to collaboration and how do we overcome them so that we can truly actually drive it. And then the second is how do we empower sort of the younger generation to also sort of be more active when it comes to climate. I think I'll take your second point first to say the younger generation is very active in climate change, right? I think the conversation of climate around the world has come to the fore because of people like Greta and because of people in the global south who have been able to say that we really demand change. Like this is not something that can continue. But those are all at a global level. At a local level, I often find that younger people, including myself, are struggling. And this is why I'm trying to also position this as more of an understanding what your local context is, right? It's very hard to walk the talk. Right? We all, I mean, right now I'm using the internet and probably fossil fuel energy to be on this call. There's a light in front of me that's powered by a plug. I don't know where that electricity is coming from. I have paid for grid offsets, but that's about it. And so I think it's important that younger people recognize that we are all struggling, and that's where it really starts to make a difference, right? And then on the other hand, in terms of collaboration, I think that's truly where one of the big challenges that I saw when I do continue to see when I try and inspire collaborations to happen is that it's actually the older people who are unwilling to collaborate, right? Because everybody's sort of set in their ways, they're not willing to learn, they are sort of, or maybe they are, but they are not necessarily moving in the right direction because they all come with their own agendas. And so the first thing I think that can help overcome challenges to collaboration is that we all need to come with a clean slate. We all need to come to recognize that we are all solving a collective problem, not providing our own solutions to it, right? So that's one mindset shift. I think the second thing that then is important when it comes to collaboration, especially when it comes to climate action, is that you need to be able to open it up, right, around the world, because these solutions are not something you'll find just in your own area. You could, for instance, find a solution somewhere else in, let's say, West Africa, or you could find a solution in, I don't know, Australia, right? But you have to find a way to contextualize it. So to give you an example, one of the big sort of challenges right now that I'm working on professionally is to find a solution to deal with all of this agricultural waste that's burnt, right? There's not enough solutions here in India, but in places like Finland, there's all of these great technologies that exist. But then how do you bring those technologies here? How do and that's where collaboration comes in to say that, look, the problem is that we're all dealing with air pollution, right? Because of burning. We're all sort of aware that these solutions exist. So we need to come together to find a way to then find the necessary actions that we need to do. So we need to first find people that have the money. We need to find people that have the technology. We need to find willing buyers of these technologies. We need to find farmers that can actually contribute their agricultural waste instead of burning it. And then you start to slowly add pieces together. So the second bit really is that there's a collaboration does not happen automatically, right? You start with one person and then you snowball it into a larger group of collaborators. So those are, I think, my big learnings and what I can share as reflections when it comes to driving collaboration. I hope that helps. I think you're on mute, Prashant. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the wonderful reply, Karan. I'd like to now call upon Shivani ma'am, the founder of Vishwa, to take the Q&A forward. Namaskar, ma'am.
Namaste. Yeah, we'll go to our next question. You said that on a day-to-day basis, how can the common person get environment into their lives? One of the simplest thing is the cleaning agents we use for the floors, for the windows. Are there any brands other the Hindustan Levers and the Procter Gamble's actually coming out with anything which is eco-friendly?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Shivani. Thank you for that. And I think it's very important to know that, yes, they are. It's not easily accessible at the moment because they're all just starting to develop these products. But there's sort of two sides to that, and I'll answer it in two ways. One is that we actually don't need Lysol in our homes. If you just go to your local garden or if you walk around and collect a few leaves and you sort of put them into a pot of water and leave it for a few days, it will create a cleaning agent. And there's many, things like orange peels, waste, like local waste from our kitchens that we can use. So there's that. So if you want to drive individual action, we can always do that. But then there's corporates that are really recognizing their role in providing alternatives to customers. So folks like Unilever, for instance, are working on products and formulations that do indeed, at least from what I know, look at more sustainable materials and sort of ingredients, right? But the issue is that there's not enough demand for them, because when you as a consumer go and purchase an off-the-shelf product that's probably 10 or 20 rupees like cheaper, or sometimes even 100 rupees cheaper, then companies are not incentivized to necessarily continue developing those products, right? So it's a sort of chicken and egg situation. But what's really interesting is that now companies are recognizing that the customer need not be the one to bear the burden of the cost, right? They need to be the ones to bear the burden of the cost. And so they are developing, they are doing R&D, and hopefully in the next year or two, we'll see a lot more products on the shelf that are more sustainable, that are more eco-friendly, that, for instance, don't rely on, fossil fuels as much as current materials do. So I hope that answers your question, because I can't say that the products are available at scale right now, but they are indeed being developed.
Is there any app, is there any website which is declaring what these products are or how to make them in the house?
There are, yes, indeed, there are platforms online that do exist, and I can share a few links with everybody, because also it depends on how much you want to do, right? So there's some very complicated formulas and some very complicated like recipes that you can use, and they're all easy to do, but then there's some that only use 2 or 3 ingredients, right, which you can do on a daily basis. So I can share these links afterwards.
Thank you so much. Ms. Lata will ask the next question.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. And thank you, Vishwa, for organizing this such a fruitful talk. And thank you, Karan, for your insight on the topic. I would like to share here my experience that we have started our NGO 12 years back with the concern that, with the obviously the climate concern. And at that point of time, my knowledge about this topic was absolutely zero. But I got so badly carried away with the factor which, worries the whole world. So I started learning on certain things. And now I'm very proud to say that I am contributing little bit of what the best capacity I can do from my side. So we are now into very much into the groundwater elevation, because the climate change is impacting the groundwater or any sort of a water very badly. So
Yeah.
we need to work on that because our food security depends on it. The total economy depends on it. Nothing can be produced without water.
Yeah.
And my next concern is that now by producing green hydrogen, it's again going to impact the water very badly. Because through water only we are going to generate the green hydrogen. So again, we are already water stressed. So आगे कैसे करेंगे? So we are concerned about the water. Water runs the economy. Water runs your life. Water is life.
Yeah.
So we need to concern for these essential things first. This is what my personal view is. Other everything is very very important. I mean, we can't leave them behind. But
Yeah.
these are the life affecting things. So
Yeah.
we should all collectively work on it. And secondly, as far as plastic is concerned, as long as the crude oil is there in use, the plastic is an inevitable product. I mean, you have to produce plastic. So working on micro level, that each one of us, I mean, the crores and the billions of people, they should stop using plastic bags and this and that. It doesn't work at all. And it will not going to work at all unless you stop the production. And production can't be stopped because we are using crude, and it's a very much byproduct of the crude.
Yeah.
So I mean, we are helpless unless we find certain very very big at macro level. If we work on micro level, we can't combat these challenges. This is what my experience. I'm working in this field for last 12 to 13 years, directly and indirectly for so many years.
Yeah.
No, I'm not so technical person, but I have learned a little bit about so many things.
Yeah. No, and really, I commend you for your work in the space. So thank you very much for that. I think a couple of things that I heard in your points was one about the need to sort of look at water more closely, which is true indeed. Some of the things that we do as part of the Global Shapers community, which is a network of about 500 hubs locally led by young people around the world in 500 cities, about 15,000 of us really. What we do is we do water audits in some cities where water stress is a big sort of concern. And so we work to engage local youth to start learning about what a water audit is. We teach them the tools, we give them the support in doing that. And then once you know what your sort of water consumption, what your level of water sort of availability is, what sort of the next pieces are, that's really when you can start to develop a plan of how to conserve water, right? And you can start to engage your local community. So I think on water, it's both a local and sort of a larger regional agenda that needs to be worked on. Because once you, at a local community level, you can sort of look at your ability to conserve the consumption of water. You can't do much about increasing groundwater levels. But then at a more regional level is where you can actually do a lot more work. And that's where, corporates come into the picture. That's where businesses come into the picture as having sort of the ability to reduce their water consumption in production processes, to support more, let's say, drip irrigation processes in agricultural farms where they get their raw material from. Instead of using fresh water, using more closed loop, circular, recycled water systems for coolants and for, circulation. These are things that can happen. And these are ways that, for instance, at a regional, more sort of corporate or less than individual level, you can make stuff happen. The second point that I heard was about green hydrogen. I think it's an emerging area. I completely agree. The sort of fact is it will continue to create water stress. I think that a lot of work is going on at a global level to ensure that green hydrogen is not seen as, the only solution, right? It is part of a package of solutions that's needed. You need, solar, you need wind, you need green hydrogen, you need many other sort of forms of renewable electricity to match the demand that we all have, right? In the time that we have to be able to replace the use of fossil fuels for energy. And then the third point, I think, following that was about the production of crude. Yes, completely agree. Unless we stop extraction of oil, we will not be able to stop the production of plastics and many other chemicals that affect us around the world and in our local lives and daily lives. Even microplastics will become an issue, which then comes back to water. But what you could do, and this is something I learned very recently, is you can start to support the need for more biorefineries, right? You can use things like agricultural waste, you can use biomass to create fuel, to create bioplastics, to create textiles, to create furniture, all sorts of things, and paper and packaging, all from biomass. You don't need to rely on fossil fuels. It's just that here's where it gets interesting, because there's all of this large corporate lobby, but then at the same time, as individuals, we can demand in our local states, and you can really demand a lot more change in terms of what projects are being commissioned and what projects are being allowed to be implemented from an energy production perspective. Yeah, it's hard. It's not something that we can all do overnight. And I think there's a lot of work going on from around the world that's addressing the big issue of the oil and gas expansion. But it's something that I'm optimistic about, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so since it's getting on to 12, I'll just close the call, the webinar, and then we will move on to our question answers. So I would first now like to request to all of you to take a 30 seconds survey to answer a poll for us. The purpose of this is to understand you a little better, to curate the topics that will suit you, that we can bring, that you all are interested in. If you are a WishwaTalks subscriber, heard it through your friends and family, or found out about the event on social media, please share it with all your, because it's these days, at this environment talk, the Facebook banned us. We could not share it with anybody. So we want WishwaTalks to move with people on word of mouth. So yes, while you're doing that, I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Karan. This is a topic that is the need of the hour, and in India especially, people's awareness of environment is very low. If I have a talk on snakes, I'll have 500 people. If I have a talk on children or education, we'll have 100 to 500 people. But if I have a talk on environment, I will not have more than 20 people. People are just not interested in the environment around. Perhaps it's because all of us are in a stage, the majority of the population in the country is in a stage where we're trying to meet ends. So perhaps this could be the reason. Thank you so much for one so young. You're dedicated to such a wonderful and needed thing for the hour. Yeah, I would also like to thank the Wishwa team, Ms. Seema, Preeti, Trishant, and all of you for coming out with such wonderful talks every month, every Saturday. Some of the talks, some of the questions and answers that the audience is putting is amazing. It's the kind of awareness you are bringing in at a time when media is completely biased. Whichever talk show you go, whichever video you watch, it's only propaganda. It's only one person's point of view. And you giving the opportunity to all the audience to complete all their question and answers is ensuring the people are getting to decide what they want to think about a particular topic. Thank you to all the WishwaTalks audience. As you've been an amazing audience, so engaging, asking such pertinent questions, and so involved in the society around us, and so wanting to contribute to make a difference in our society. I really want to thank each of you for making this difference. So now I will proceed to the upcoming talks in the next few days, next few Saturdays. we have a talk on elder care as a social responsibility. The speaker is Dr. Anjaneyulu Konda, palliative care physician from Sparsh Hospice. It's on 11th November at 11 a.m. Saturday. See, all of us have adults at home. It's a reality. And previously we had joint families. We had parents there, grandchildren there, children growing. We had a support structure. We had an environment which was conducive to take care of the elderly. Today, all of us are in nuclear families. All of us have too much of work, too many expectations from everybody. And what is the new moral code? What is the new appropriate way of handling this situation of our taking care of our elderly? So we really want all of us to dwell, to think, to explore this topic. So we have been giving it a lot of importance. The next talk is on adventure sports. It's by the speaker Manideep K. He's the president and an outdoor leader. His organization is Great Hyderabad Adventure Club. One of the things that Vishwa has been working on is we want children and adults to have a life beyond just work and home responsibilities. So we want you all to explore what adventure is, how we can make our life more meaningful. So we are coming up with such talks, and we have a request to the audience that we would like you to ask us which topics to come out with talks, which are more relevant today, which are not being covered. That is one aspect. Second, we would also like you to suggest some speakers, especially about, since electioneering is coming up, we would like you to tell us, these are the experts in this field, and suggest speakers to us who are experts in their fields. Yeah, with this, I close the webinar. We can continue with our question and answers. And yes, welcome to Shmail. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, I can to ask?
Yes.
Okay. I firstly very interesting presentation. I like to participate in this type of presentations, and I personally too very interested in the subject of climate changes and different aspects of this topic. And my question is, what, according to you, opportunities creating a climate crisis, climate changes for poor and low socioeconomic groups of population? How, according to you, climate changes can support resolution problems of poverty and social inequality?
Thanks for that question. I think it's a really important topic because we always talk about climate change in the context of, larger global environment, but not necessarily in terms of how it connects to the equality and inequity, right? If you think about it, actually today, we're not just in a climate crisis, we're in a poly crisis. There's many crises going on. So there's a crisis of inequality, there's a crisis of poverty, there's an economic crisis, there's an environmental crisis. But that doesn't mean that, each of these crises are separate. They're very interconnected. So on one hand, climate change very much does affect underdeveloped communities, vulnerable communities, people from lower socioeconomic strata. Because one, they have to sort of be out there dealing with the consequences of climate change. So they have to be living in these extremely hot environments. They have to deal with rapid weather changes. They have to deal with disasters when they do happen. Beyond that, they also don't have access to a lot of the solutions that I, also mentioned today, because, well, it is indeed difficult for them. So I think people working on climate change and locally and individually, the only thing that we should and must do is, one, recognize the implications of our actions on these people. So if you are, for instance, throwing something away, continuing on this idea of a circular economy, you have to also recognize that that's something that a local waste picker or someone that sort of is unfortunately homeless will end up going and picking up from waste bins from around. But if, for instance, you were to be able to support them by, instead of just throwing it away, but to actually finding people in your local communities that are affected by climate change, that can be affected by climate change, supporting them with the kind of resources that they need to deal with immediate climate impacts. So simple things like masks to deal with pollution, right? Simple things like providing them access and opportunity to shelter in times of extreme heat. These are all things that we can do to support people that sort of don't have the same kind of opportunities we do. And this is not a comprehensive list. I'm sure there's a lot more that we could do. Number one being getting a lot of people out of poverty. But that's sort of a larger agenda that I think we all have a big role to play in. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you very much.
Just a second.
Next question is, you were saying when our previous speaker spoke, she was asking this is not something that the common man can address. It is something the government should take it on. And what laws are ensuring that at the source of the causing of pollution, this is being addressed? Which are these laws in India?
It's a good question, and I'll be very honest and say that I'm not an expert at the sort of legal sort of frameworks and legislations in India. But there are indeed some sort of pieces of legislation that I do know about. So for instance, things like the plastic waste ban, right, is actually not intended to affect us as consumers. It's actually intended to, going back to Mitlata's point about, the fact that we can't do much about plastic. It's going back to the fact that we can't be creating any plastic waste. And so that means at the root cause, you have to stop producing that much plastic, disposable plastic, right? So that's one kind of legislation. But those are more things that happen locally, so not locally, but at least at the city level. At the same time, you also have legislations that are currently coming around.
Can't come on the screen.
Sorry. Yeah, so there's legislations that are currently happening on, for instance, ensuring that there's more renewable energy installations happening around the world and in India. So there's sort of solar incentives for solar plants. There's incentives to develop biorefineries around India that are all coming from the government. And these are sort of subsidies or government grants or whatever it might be to actually start implementing at the sort of source, for instance. Then there's also more sort of punitive legislation that is coming up around emissions reduction from corporates and things like in your supply chains, you have to do human rights due diligence, or in your supply chains, you have to do environmental due diligence, so that you are not creating negative consequences through your operations. These are sort of not just in India, but at a global level, because supply chains are not just in India, they are sort of, all around the world. And so these are things that are happening at the international level. So in India, I think it's more incentives for green solutions. And then in the global context, it's about how do we ensure accountability and transparency. Those are the main legislations that I know of. I'm sure there are more that are coming up around ESG in the next couple of weeks or months. And of course, the biggest one is when the Indian government, the first government in the world to mandate corporate giving through CSR, was the Indian government. And so there's sort of other legislations like that that will continue to be improved and rolled out. So yeah.
So the next question is from Mr. Vijay Kumar. The present policy of central government is to promote more electrical heating equipment. Actually, in India, our electricity generation from thermal plants making more carbon footprint. Government intention is to reduce oil imports. On the other hand, it is increasing global warming, especially if you see in Telangana. We have the Kaleshwar Dam. On the one hand, we are saying that, hey, listen, we're giving drinking water to everybody in the city, across the villages, which is a great thing. But the way it is being done is spending 5,000 crores every year getting coal to lift water and send that water to places like Anantapur, where paddy farming is being done. It would make, why is it that there is no awareness, neither in the public, to even question why is this happening? Why is there such ignorance prevalent in our societies?
I don't know if I'm the one to answer that question, but I think it has to do with, and I think someone put this in the chat as well, there isn't enough information available locally, right? It's not a lot of the information that exists right now, and I think I started off with that also, was the fact that a lot of it is about these distant ideas that climate change is happening because of carbon emissions, and the impact of it is something that is more in terms of melting polar ice caps. But what does that mean at a local context, right? If, like you're mentioning, it's about buying coal and actually heating and lifting water and steam to then create energy, why aren't we talking more about that? One, because there's actually not enough information available for people to realize that that has climate impacts. One, in English, but also two, in local languages, right? So that is a big effort that needs to be made. And I don't think it's a question of ignorance, very honestly, though yes, I agree, we are quite ignorant in many cases. I think it's a question of information not reaching people because of the fact that there's a huge block of this information that is being created, right, by many actors, including sort of local people with vested interests, as well as corporates. Why would anybody want to tell you that actually what they're doing is not good for the environment or for you, right? I think it comes down to that. But there are many local NGOs that are trying to develop this information, that are trying to translate a lot of research papers into local languages to make them accessible. There's a whole movement actually now, and it's slowly starting in India, to make climate change knowledge more accessible, to create a repository for people to ask questions. Like, if you were to go onto Google and ask, why is this happening? So to create sort of those avenues, it's stuff that climate activists and others in the space have not actually done before. And I think it's very important that they start doing it. So there's a huge push on how can media, how can communication, how can digital media and strategists actually help in getting climate knowledge out there, and how can you start giving people the tools to ask the right questions? Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, a hydrothermal electric plant, while useful, is indeed, like you say, not good for the environment in some way, for the local environment, right? But it's good at a larger sort of policy level because you're moving away from fossil fuels. But I think it's a question of accessibility of knowledge, and I'm seeing a lot of movement. I don't think it's there yet. I think there's a lot more we can do individually, and if there are spaces, connect to actually translate a lot of that information into ways in which we can start acting on it.
The next question is from K. Nagarajan. What do you think about local politics, local governments, and collectively combating the environment and climate problems? Impacts of dams on ocean life may be explained. Can we assume that and underdeveloped countries are dustbins of developing countries? 2-3 questions at the same time.
Yeah, I'll start with the last point around dustbins. Indeed, they actually are, right? And it's something that we have to change. So to give you an example, in the world of the textile industry, in Europe, whatever waste is created, right? So things that you, for instance, might put into a local collection bin or might dump into a garbage bin, wherever it is, a lot of that waste is actually shipped out of Europe to places like Ghana, and then it's sort of thrown out there, and it lands up in the oceans, it lands up in landfill. I don't know if anybody's recently seen, but in Chile, in the Atacama Desert, there's a mountain of textile waste that is from Europe and the US that you can see from space. Now it's become that big. Interestingly, India has a history of managing and being the world's dustbin. As terrible as it sounds, we've done it really well. So when waste, textile waste especially, or other waste comes into the country through ports like Kandla or in Tamil Nadu or wherever else, this waste is processed quite well, in the sense that it's sent to local recycling industries, it's used to develop insulation in cars, it's used to create new forms of paper and packaging. So there's a lot of, I guess, in India, because we have that mindset, that Jugaad mindset, and we also have, you know, we value resources and things locally in India. So I think we've done a better job of being the world's dustbin, but indeed, we are one of the countries that does receive a lot of waste from other countries. There are bans coming up, and that might tie into sort of the policy question on waste import and export bans that are indeed coming up, but they're very slow moving and they'll have many larger implications. And obviously there will be legal loopholes that people can use to then overcome them. So I hope that answers that bit. On the bit around local politics and local governments, very honestly, the most important stakeholder at a sort of larger level that can tackle climate problems and sort of solve issues with the environment are local municipalities and local governments. They have much more power than, you know, a national scheme or a state level scheme or plan, because they are the ones that have the community backing them. They are the ones that have the ability to implement solutions on the ground. They are the ones that decide who the contractors are. They are the ones that decide, you know, what projects should be done. They are the ones that can activate urban local bodies to do things. So very honestly, local politicians and local governments and municipalities are the ones where I think the most change can happen from. And we're starting to see that. India actually has a wide variety of examples of local municipalities, commissioners from different districts, collectors, various other people that have done a lot of really good work around water, around plastic waste management, around soil conservation and health, around biodiversity, starting from, you know, all the way in the south in Kanyakumari, all the way up north, around Delhi and Haryana.
Is that sporadic or a few commissioners doing work sufficient?
It's not sufficient, but I think it's a good start, right? It's very recent work. And now we're starting to see a lot of them come together to influence their sort of larger constituencies and their sort of groups. And to say that, look, we spent 5 years doing these projects, they have been successful. Now it's maybe time to replicate them in other communities. I think there is a slow and steady movement. So I'm optimistic. I think in the beginning it seemed extremely sporadic, but now, you say that small little dots make a big picture. So I'm starting to finally see more dots making that picture.
That's wonderful. Is there, now all of us know that the source has to be cut and we have to find alternatives. Does the government put in certain funds to actually do research to find alternatives to polluting solutions?
Yeah, very much so. The government does indeed invest, not directly at a national level, but the government has research institutions stationed across all 4 corners of the country. So they have North India, South India, East and West, each have institutes and centers of excellence, all set up by, for instance, various entities, including folks like Niti Aayog, etc., that and Invest India, that have set up these centers of excellence that do research to find these alternatives. So big areas of work right now include agriculture, work on the agriculture sector. There's work on, so to tackle food security, there's work on finding better solutions and more sort of local solutions to using agrochemicals And so there's a huge actual government push on using more bio inputs in different state governments where agriculture has sort of a stronghold in terms of the state economy, and creating local communities and markets to push this forward. So yes, indeed, there are investments coming from the government, but oftentimes you don't see or hear about them because one, because it's so bureaucratic, and so that's not the thing that gets the limelight, because government invests in research on creating, manure from cow, biofertilizer from cow dung doesn't sound as sexy as, investing in a solar panel to power an airport or something. So yeah, it is.
Are there quasi-government organizations? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, indeed. So folks like Invest India, Niti Aayog, etc., the national, urban infrastructure people. These are all entities and quasi-government organizations that are doing this work.
Do you have a list of them that we can post it to our participants?
I don't have it, but I can create a list for you with a few examples. Yeah.
Okay. Then next question is again from Mr. Rangarajan. Large level usage and wastage of water by industries, factories affecting the water needs of domestic and irrigation fields. Remedy may be explained.
Sorry, I just need to understand the question a bit more.
Large level of usage of water and large level of usage and wastage of water by industries, factories affecting the water needs of domestic and irrigational fields. Remedy, can you explain any remedies?
Well, I think the main thing that is currently taking precedence is drip irrigation, because unfortunately we can't do without irrigation in many areas in India, given sort of the consequences of a changing climate. So Gujarat has a really good drip irrigation program. Places like Madhya Pradesh also have a very good drip irrigation program. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, sort of some of those areas are starting to see it. But in the south, the interesting thing is that because of all the wells and the check dams, etc., that were developed historically in the region, there's enough water channels, which leads to a lot of excessive water usage. So there are now some moves going on that non-profits around India are sort of pushing for better water management systems at corporate industrial parks. They're also pushing for better water usage on agricultural fields. But I would say the only main thing that does need to happen is for government to come in and start educating people about excessive water consumption. Because until that happens, the moment you see water coming through a pipe, you think that it's an endless supply because of how much water comes out of it. But then when you realize that actually your field or your facility doesn't need that much water, that's where the difference starts to come up. So I think the only remedy is behavioral and educational in that case.
Okay. So I'm sorry to say, but while you're saying a lot of governments are helping out in tanks and dams and check dams.
I don't think governments are helping out there. Yeah, they've been there because someone developed them.
Yeah, and because you see what I am seeing presently in Andhra Pradesh is for centuries, the Rajas or the rulers of that time have ensured every village has a tank.
Exactly.
Today, for votes, these tanks are being closed, shut, filled with soil, and given away as housing plots for votes.
Yeah.
There is zero. There used to be water committees for centuries across the country. Today, thanks to the dams and the canals which are coming and running water on taps, these water committees in the villages have been disbanded, and there is no local level water governance that is happening in the villages.
Yeah.
The checks and balances that are needed at a village level have been disappearing, and if we do not as citizens address it, it's going to, because yes, it's great to have a dam, yes, it's great to have water coming, but what will we do when there is a drought? Because if these water communities ensure that their dependence on the water coming from such places is probably 30%, 40%, but in case of drought, these cities or the towns themselves have enough water harvesting pits, enough tanks. The groundwater is replenished properly, taken care properly. In times of drought, it will be useful.
Yeah, no, I completely second that, and I agree. It's important for us to be active citizens in this space. Yeah, like you said, and that's why I mentioned historically there have been many wells and dams and canals that were built in the south because of the patronage of royal families. Even in Hyderabad, for instance, all the step wells, etc., that are now being sort of rejuvenated in some places. But the issue comes in, like you very rightly said, when there's local politics that that sort of I very honestly ruin it, right?
So every 30 seconds of conversation you make, I get 10 questions that I want to ask you. There are 300 plus step wells identified, and there are 2 or 3 step wells revived.
Yeah, it's a slow process, but I think also requires us as communities in those areas where the step wells are to make an effort instead of dumping waste into them, to actually start recognizing that they're valuable local resources. And unless there's education that happens to do that and awareness building that happens to do that, it would be difficult.
Yeah, then there is a question by Vinay Tatke. Can someone prepare a paper of today's discussions and share it with to participants?
Yeah. I'm happy to put sort of links and notes in a summary and send it over to everybody that was participating. I don't know if I can create a paper, but I can include links to different papers that can help there. Yeah.
Okay, there is another question from Mr. Joshi Devani. I would like to know how much of the available materials around climate domain is accessible to local people. We have to make sure all the existing materials is translated to local languages. Question is who?
Yeah, who is going to translate is the question, and into what languages and how much. I think it's not an impossible feat. During COVID, we saw that a lot of local communities were taking, health guidelines and translating it into local languages and sharing it with others. So if we could do that, why aren't we doing that for, climate knowledge?
So I would like to answer that question.
Yeah.
I have personally attended a few water committees, and what I realized is the bureaucracy in our country has complete knowledge of every tank, every river, everything. There are enough retired IAS officers who have A to Z information on this topic. All we need is, if there is an IAS officer who is ready to, who's got the experience, who's ready to do this research paper, and if one paper is enough, now we can translate it into all the languages. We need someone to help. Vishwa is ready to collaborate. Vishwa is ready to pay for this research. If anybody can identify or take it on, the same participants, as I told you, environment, nobody in the country is interested. We are going to have very few people. But if I can see that there are 30, 40, 50 people here, that means you're passionate about this topic. So if there is anybody out there who knows, who can identify an IAS officer, a retired IAS officer who can do this paper, may not be for the entire country, but for a region. Vishwa is ready to pay for the research and ensure that this is translated and shared. Yes, then I have a next question. जो एरोप्लेन से आर्टिफिशियल रेनिंग फॉग करते हैं, हर आप टेक्नोलॉजी के बारे में अगर नॉलेज नहीं है तो वॉच यूट्यूब चैनल डॉक्टर विलास जगदले. आर्टिफिशियल पोल्यूशन करते हैं थ्रू केमिकल ट्रायल्स.
I don't know enough about chemtrails. I'll have to probably watch those YouTube videos. I know that they're bad for the environment, and I know that there was recent research done to change the way planes take off and land, so that they can avoid the development of these chemtrails. But I very honestly, I'm not an expert and I don't know enough about it.
So are you saying while planes take off and land, they leave a chemical trail?
Yes, indeed. So I don't know if you ever see the white fog that is left behind as planes take off and land. That's a chemtrail, and they are basically a mix of water vapor, bad fumes, gases from the burning of the fuel, and from many other things on a plane. I don't know enough about them, but I know that there is work being done to look at it from an aerodynamics perspective. Can that help stop the creation of chemtrails?
This is from Mr. Rupinder Singh. बिग साइक्लो की बारे बताइए जहां फूड कंट्रोल किए जाएगा. What's that?
I have no idea.
I didn't understand. Mr. Rupinder, if you're there, please raise your hand and ask your question again. Climate change is a game of the corporate. This is a statement made by him again. This is from Mr. Goswami. In context of my state, that is Assam, engagement of the local government, PRIs and ULBs is mostly overlooked. The state action plan for climate change largely overlooked their scopes, roles. We're waiting for the new. That means 21 to 2030. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. I think Assam, the role of local sort of bodies was not considered. And so I think there's right now a few different states and cities in India, I'm not at liberty to say which, unfortunately, that are engaged with a global nonprofit to actually develop a more robust climate action plan that does include local governance bodies, citizens, young people, as well as sort of big corporates that exist in the region. To play a part in developing the climate action plan and developing a plan that is, one, measurable, it is actionable, it is targeted, and it is easily implementable in a short span of time, which has longer term sort of benefits. I can't necessarily say who these actors are, unfortunately, but it is happening. I think that the 4 or 5 cities that do model this and demonstrate it will be the test case. And then more cities and states across India are due to pick them up, because we do have a national commitment to develop these local climate plans and then roll them forward.
There's an acknowledgement from Ms. Nidhi Anand. Thank you, Karan. Your talks are always very informative and inspiring. We have a few members from Rotary Club of Hyderabad Midtown, and we have a network of schools we work with called Interact Clubs and colleges called Rotaract Clubs. We believe that if a child's mind is ignited and if student groups are impacted, they can create a larger positive impact in society. What advice would you have for our clubs for becoming a collaborating partner on climate change initiatives? And as you said, collaboration is the key.
Yeah. No, thank you, Nidhi, first of all, for that. I think in terms of ways that Rotaract clubs, etc., could become collaborating partners. I think Rotaract clubs are the hubs that could be used to actually develop local climate collaborations. This is also somewhere where you could partner with the Global Shapers community in your local cities or chapters to then develop projects that you can all do together. Yeah, I'm sure there's many ideas that I can share and think of. It's hard to sort of think of key projects or tangible projects right now, but if you reach out to me on email, I'm happy to.
I can add to that. Vishwa is doing WishwaTalks Junior and WishwaTalks Youth for schools and colleges. Every month we do talks in these schools, and bringing awareness of the ecology at a school level is very, very critical. In fact, for the Ganesh Chaturthi, thanks to Ma'am Miss Seema Kumar, we were able to do the making of Ganeshas with clay, and the whole school participated, and it was wonderful. moving from polluting agents, Ganesha's made with polluting items to which are being again dumped into our lakes. We would like to bring in these kind of awareness programs in schools, and we are doing it. We would really love to collaborate with you, and we will bring all these talks to as many schools as anybody wants. Please subscribe to WishwaTalks Junior and youth, please. Yes, next, there is another appreciation from Ms.
Shivani ma'am?
Yes.
Hello. Sorry to interrupt. Ma'am, Karan has to leave urgently for another meeting, and
I can't hear
I'd
you.
like to see if it's possible.
Please message me.
Just
I
a
can't hear
second.
you. Okay.
Ma'am, I've already messaged you. Could
Okay,
you
I'll
please
have a
see the
look at it.
messages?
I'll have a look at it.
Yeah.
Thanks for the meeting, Mr. Goswami. Thanks for the meeting. Largely appreciated for making it so simple and demystified. Can the recording be shared? We will share the PPT. Yes. Next.
I think that also generally, sorry, I'm also just looking at the time and I do have to jump onto another call, but I'm happy to sort of answer questions in email if that's useful and helpful, and maybe put some links and stuff to share back. But I do want to say that I'm just loving the inflow of questions. It's really heartening to see all of that. You're on mute.
Ma'am, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Yeah.
This question is from Mr. Deepak. There definitely should be a focused plant-based food systems, as Dr. Sailesh Rao of Climate Healers recently in 2021 came out with a white paper which shows that animal agriculture is responsible for more than 70% global GHG emissions. And considering his recent presentation, it's even more when we consider deforestation, desertification of fertile lands, as well as impact on oceans and disappearing wildlife. Just call.
Yeah. I think there
You're
must
on mute.
be a focus on food systems. I think food systems are, if we think about it, agriculture and its allied activities, I think contribute to about 20-25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's more that come in when you think about, food systems, which include, production, consumption, wastage, a bunch of other things. But yes, I think that food systems is something that we can all individually work on. It's actually what I did my thesis in. And there's sort of two things that you could do. One is you could look at sort of how do you grow and consume more locally. So how do you support more sort of, local farmer producers? How do you bring farmers to farmers markets that are not, the fancy kinds that happen, but actual local farmers markets like the Raitu Mandis, etc. Where you get them fair prices and collectivized produce. Then the other thing you could do is also create more sustainable production in your own homes with urban farms, vertical farms, garden plots, things like that. So there's a lot one can do in the food system space.
Thank you so much. Wonderful talk, and for one so young, participating in the spreading of knowledge about the ecology is wonderful. With this, I would like to thank the speaker and audience and the Wishwa team. Thank you so much.